When we think of Magna Carta, we think of 1215 and King John at Runnymede and the Barons' attempt to press the idea that the king was not above the law. But what if I told you that Magna Carta doesn't actually date to 1215? You'd think I was crazy. I've come to Tewkesbury Abbey to reflect on this because there's a memorial in the Abbey that gives away into this story. The memorial is to Gilbert de Clare, who was Earl of Gloucester and Hertford, and he died in 1230. His memorial on the altar floor bears a striking inscription. In Latin, Magna Carta is law, let the king henceforth beware. But the Magna Carta that his memorial refers to is probably not John's 1215 charter, but rather another charter issued 10 years later. King John was a slippery customer who never had any intention of adhering to the 1215 charter. And that is exactly what happened. And so the barons invited Prince Louis of France into England to take over. King John died in October 1216, and his 9-year-old son, Henry III, came to the throne bang in the middle of a civil war. To help suck supporters away from Louis and over to Henry, Magna Carta was reissued in 1216. In fact, it was reissued in 1216, in 1217, and then again in 1225. Like London buses, you wait centuries for a charter limiting the excesses of arbitrary royal power, and then several come along at once. It's only with the 1217 charter that we get the name Magna Carta. In that year, John's charter was reissued, along with a new charter, the Charter of the Forest, which focused specifically on rights within the royal forest, an area of particular contention. The term Magna Carta, or Big Charter, was coined by an unknown clerk who needed to differentiate between it and the Charter of the Forest. The 1215 charter was not known as Magna Carta at the time, but simply as the Charter of Runnymede, because that's where it was sealed. By 1225, Henry was a bit more secure on the throne, but his government needed money and support, so in exchange for a tax, he voluntarily reissued Magna Carta. But crucially, this version was different because it removed the controversial security clause that had allowed barons to constrain the king if he didn't follow the terms of the charter. So when Gilbert de Clare's memorial warns the king to obey Magna Carta, it's probably the 1225 charter that he is talking about. Yet today, when we commemorate Magna Carta, it's 1215 that takes centre stage. Why? Because centuries later, in 1759, a lawyer called William Blackstone published all the charters together, and he decided to call John's charter Magna Carta, and his interpretation stuck, and since then we've thought of 1215 and Magna Carta together. It is the later charter that's actually the one that people in the Middle Ages referred back to. It's that charter that still has a couple of provisions on the UK statute book. Check out the History Extra podcast where I've got an interview with David Carpenter. He's a leading expert on Magna Carta and he explains the story completely, and he's got a feature in the latest issue of BBC History magazine.